and then you can get rolling.
For the Protection of PEI Lands is specifically concerned about the role
of the Lands Protection Act as a protector of the natural environment of PEI. It is our position that how the land is owned and controlled has a definite and direct impact on every aspect of land use practices. But this concern runs deeper than practices. It even runs deeper than the ordinary understanding of sustainable, a term, by the way, which has become, for many, a mere empty slogan, covering up more than it reveals. Maybe we understand sustainability better by going to its roots, the verb to sustain. The thesaurus gives us a variety of aspects of to sustain. It also means to maintain, to keep up, to uphold, to nourish, to support, and to feed. All of those are meanings of the root of sustainability. When we assess the spirit and the intent of the Lands Protection Act, we see the limits placed on land holdings as a means of keeping land in the hands of those who will respect this natural treasure. The Lands Protection Act came into being in the aftermath of the development in Ottawa of the first ever formal Canadian agricultural policy. That was in 1969. Some of you wouldn't even know that year because you weren't born then. Prince Edward Island was immediately brought under this umbrella by the Comprehensive Development Plan, which some of you would not know about either. It is important to note that the designers of this policy were mainly accountants, lawyers, and businessmen. I have all their names still. Their plan was to change once and for all the direction of agriculture in Canada. We see that plan recreated over and over and over again with each successive federal policy that comes out about the direction of agriculture. We see that plan recreated in Growing Together, as example, Growing Together 1, Growing Together 2, and Growing Together 3 coming up. The original plan is lived out to the present day, and this plan was precisely the following: to reduce the number of farms, to consolidate land holdings, to specialize production into commodities and into regions of the country, and to develop a vigorous, strong export market. It was intended to make way for big business, and that was not hidden at any time in the devising of this plan. It was meant to make way for big business in what would be known as the food industry. All of this was presented in an attempt to modernize agriculture. Most people who witnessed that process unfold in Canada, and at the same time here in PEI, know that the word modernize meant clearly to capitalize and to turn agriculture over to the control of industrial capital. That was a very precise moment in our history. We need to go back to that and understand that moment. So here we are today, with the use of most of PEI land enveloped by modernized industrial agriculture. We see capital investors and public policy makers even chomping at the bit to modernize the Act, to bring it into line with the goals of capital, instead of enhancing the Lands Protection Act to be a protector of land and controller of capitalist greed and entitlement.
Okay, and I'm just going to speak to the spirit and intent of the Lands Protection Act. Our coalition insists that the spirit and intent of the Lands Protection Act was, and still is, the protection of PEI's fragile ecology, environment, and lands. The overriding theme running through the PEI Lands Protection Act and its essence is steadfast stewardship. Our assessment of the spirit and intent of the Act relates to the setting in the early 1980s as perceived by then Premier Angus MacLean and his colleagues. It was a time when a vertically integrated corporation, the Irvings, was making moves to acquire and control more and more island farmland. Some of MacLean's colleagues who still live in our community insist that one clear intent was to keep farmland in the control of island farm families and out of the hands of off-island investors. Allowing 3,000 acres for corporations was not meant to placate the Irvings and other industrial corporations, nor did it imply that a non-farm corporation would have any access to farmland. The 3,000 acres for corporations was meant to provide farm families with a good business arrangement, a family corporation, to fully include spouses and sons and daughters in the ownership and control of the family farming operation. The 3,000 acre limit envisioned 3 family members in this arrangement. Supposedly, their ongoing capital would come from product sales. Our understanding of the outcomes is that the Lands Protection Act, while concentrating 1,000 acres for individuals and 3,000 for corporations, has had far-reaching significance beyond the mere mathematical aspect of ownership. It brings up the question of control. Many farmers and PEI know that deeds do not give them control of their own land. They know that when a major corporation controls their access to inputs and credit and dictates production decisions, then that corporation has control of the farmer, the farm, and the land. There is a direct relationship between ownership and control of the land and the way that the land is used and/or abused. Because of the nature and goals of industrial corporations, their involvement in farming as monocropping in PEI has resulted in massive environmental damage. This is displayed for all to see in the soil degradation by erosion, the decrease in soil organic matter, the overuse of pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and nitrates. We see fish kills and the destruction of other marine life and wildlife as a direct result of the form of land use resulting from industrial, corporate ownership and control.
It is our understanding that part of the mandate of the Natural Resources and Environmental Sustainability Committee is to assess the capacity, as we said before, for environmental sustainability in various aspects of life in PEI. It is our hope that you, this committee, will be able to do that in a critical manner after hearing the voices of the wider community. The key to this is being able to discern the actual current and future needs of the province in the most objective way possible. We all see the current and future needs of PEI from our own perspective, of course. The following recommendations, there are 13 of them, are the result of the ongoing research of the Coalition for the Protection of PEI Lands and our interactions with various groups and organizations of interest in the community. We share with you some of our findings. With each finding here, there is a corresponding highlighted recommendation which we propose to your committee for presentation to the legislature and to the government of Prince Edward Island.
Okay, number 1, we witness a growing awareness in PEI community about the wisdom of the land limits on individuals and corporations.
Just whenever you speak, Marie, can you turn down your headphones? Just we're having feedback in the in the live. Yeah. Yeah.
Number 2? Okay.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
I'll just start that again.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay. So we witness a growing awareness in the PEI community about the wisdom of the land limits on individuals and corporations. People understand that those who are lobbying for an increase belong to a very small and select number of residents whose model of production is seriously reducing the organic matter in our soil. Many more people are now implying that land is best protected when it is kept in the hands of farm families and that the expansion of large corporate ownership does not add up to protection of our land.
The Coalition for the Protection of PEI Lands recommends that the Government of Prince Edward Island maintain the land limits currently mandated by the Lands Protection Act.
Number 2, there's an increase in the boldness with which industrial corporate sector, for example the Irvings, find ways to circumvent the intent of the Lands Protection Act and thereby add more and more acreage to their holdings. Many say that the problem is loopholes in the Act. Others say that the loopholes in the Act are not the problem, but that it is a barefaced violation of the Act carried out with impunity.
Therefore, the Coalition for the Protection of PEI Lands recommends that the Government of Prince Edward Island identify and close any loopholes in the Lands Protection Act which make it possible for a transaction such as the infamous Brundle Red Fox Acres land exchange. If loopholes are not the problem and it is a matter of weakness in the enforcement, then we expect the government to take action to strengthen that enforcement.
Number 3. It appears that the PEI Business Corporations Act has created a means by which corporations can bypass the Lands Protection Act by buying another corporation which coincidentally has land among its assets, and thus take ownership of that land as one of the assets.
Therefore, the Coalition for the Protection of PEI Lands recommends that the Government of PEI insists on the necessity of amending the PEI Business Corporations Act to remove the allowance to gain ownership of land by buying a corporation which owns land.
Number 4, the Business Corporation Registry is an example of a serious lack of transparency, putting needed information in a manner so difficult to access that it's out of reach for most searchers.
The Coalition for the Protection of PEI Lands recommends that the Government of Prince Edward Island review the Business Corporations Registry and reorganize it to be easily available to anyone looking for information about the names of the owners and also the shareholders of all registered companies, including numbered companies.
Number 5, the land registry is not user-friendly and tends to confuse rather than inform researchers who have the right to trace land holdings.
The Coalition for the Protection of PEI Lands recommends that the Government of Prince Edward Island streamline the land registry so that it is easily accessible, logical as far as being able to research landowners and have total transparency.
Number 6, there seems to be no plan for end usage of PEI lands by identifying farmland, forestry land, natural habitats, river systems, and land for housing, industry, and recreation. People have been heard to ask, how much land does one need for one home? In PEI, we witness people building a one-family home in the middle of 40 acres of farmland.
Therefore, the Coalition for the Protection of PEI Lands recommends that the Government of Prince Edward Island develop a plan for designation of land according to its appropriate use, and that the plan include the clarification that farmland not be used for the expansion of housing or for industrial operations.
Number 7, the community is no longer impressed by the language of sustainable anything. The word has no meaning. Some of the so-called sustainable farm practices are often just window dressing, some token procedures.
The Coalition for the Protection of PEI Lands recommends that the Government of PEI develop real, ongoing, long-term, approved methods for nurturing the land. It should be believable if government provided incentives for practices that directly result in the long-term increase of organic matter in the soil.
Number 8, the authority and roles of IRAC in relation to lands protection and lands transactions are neither clearly defined nor transparent.
The Coalition for the Protection of PEI Lands recommends that the Government of PEI clarify the authority and the roles of IRAC.
Number 9, many people in the community have more trust that land would be truly protected if a non-governmental body were to oversee all matters pertaining to land. Such an entity would need to function protected from political interference or influence.
Therefore, the Coalition for the Protection of PEI Lands recommends that the government of Prince Edward Island establish a permanent commission independent from government to oversee all matters relating to land ownership, control, and land use. However, such a commission would be responsible to a minister and report twice yearly to the legislature and be subject to a yearly audit.
Number 10, there is a considerable uncertainty and actual disbelief in the community that the government has the power to force a corporation with land holdings over the permissible limits to divest. In fact, this would be nothing new. In the early life of the Lands Protection Act, Irvings and some others were ordered to divest of land in order to come into compliance with the Act. We have the same Act now, and it could happen now as well.
The Coalition for the Protection of PEI Lands recommends that the government of Prince Edward Island develop concrete and feasible plans for Irvings and other corporations to divest of land holdings over limits.
Number 11, there is an increasing awareness that initiating the process of land banking is long overdue. The Kevin Arsenault study is already gathering proverbial dust. Meanwhile, new farmers are waiting in hopes of a program that can make farmland available at a reasonable cost.
The Coalition for the Protection of PEI Lands recommends that the government of Prince Edward Island take ownership of the land banking research and set the wheels in motion to establish it as a solution for farm families to enhance their operations and for new farmers to get access to land at a reasonable cost.
Number 12, most people in the community know the meaning of spirit and intent and purpose in their daily life. But it's strange that when these words are addressed in relation to the Lands Protection Act, the response is usually a blank stare.
Therefore, the Coalition for the Protection of PEI Lands recommends that the government of PEI take the lead in talking openly about the spirit, intent, and purpose of the Lands Protection Act, and to say clearly how they can enforce spirit, intent, and purpose of the Act.
Number 13, this is the last one, I think. Many people see the Horace Carver's report from 2013 as a high point in the evolution of the land history of PEI. Many of his recommendations have yet to be put into effect. One in particular promotes a wider, formal, perpetual engagement of the community in land protection issues.
Therefore, finally, the Coalition for the Protection of PEI Lands recommends that the government of Prince Edward Island incorporate recommendation number 28 of the Horace Carver report, and I quote, to establish an advisory group made up of farmers and non-farmers that will consult with islanders on matters relating to the Lands Protection Act and report to the Legislative Assembly every 3 years.
So in conclusion, we are conscious that while we study and consult and deliberate, land transactions are going on around us at full speed. Further, while governments continue to use the term sustainability in most land-related communications, we do not see evidence of this. We continue to see fish kills in toxic waterways, topsoil blowing in the wind and into our waterways, and loss of habitat for more and more wildlife. It's the only place I know of red snow. But anyway, pesticide sales should be decreasing significantly, and yet this is not the case. We urge you to consider how much longer our fragile lands can sustain this abuse and to make recommendations to rethink the manner in which we treat our land before it's too late. The Coalition for the Protection of PEI Lands thanks you again for this opportunity to share our observations, thoughts, and hopes with you. We hope that you'll be all enriched by this experience of this consultation and that you'll be proud of your work. Respectfully submitted to Coalition for the Protection of PEI Lands.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from members? Sydney?
Thank you, Chair, and I really appreciate your presentation and everybody coming in. I'm curious, have you presented to the Land Matters PEI group and in a bigger, broader sense, what's your feedback so far on that process?
From the Land Matters?
Just the setup of the advisory group, the obviously public consultation is tricky right now, but the way it's going about, what their goals are, that type of thing. I mean, it's similar to one of Horse Carver's recommendations, but not full-fledged. But I'm curious to know your reaction to that whole process.
I'm really impressed that you read that. Thank you. Because we wonder when we make presentations like this whether anybody ever reads them afterwards. However, we had a really great reception in our presentation to that committee, and a lot of really good questions and interest in the issues, especially the ones that are related to our recommendations. Our recommendations are the same ones, by the way. So just in case you think you've got another set, it's the same set of recommendations that we made to them, and so we had a lot of dialogue about that. The area where we didn't have dialogue, and which is always very strange to us, is that nobody talked about the vision of agriculture and what we consider to be the philosophy that we envision for future of agriculture and PEI. There was no discussion of that, and it's crucial. Like, we have to talk about that. We can't go on just having one side give a position, another side give a position. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about why we feel that we represent a lot of people in PEI when we talk to you. And you represent a lot of people also because you were voted for after all. But we hear a lot from the community, and what we hear from the community is very passionate. And the land is so close to all of us. I don't care where we live in PEI, the land is really close to us. It's in our blood. And I feel that the issues that we need to be dealing with are like, for whom is this land designed? We hope it's for the people. But there are different views of that. And lots of times the only view that and we said that in our presentation, lots of times the only view you hear is the view from the upper level of the system itself, and the people who are profiting most from the kind of agriculture that we have in PEI. So I don't know if that's a kind of a long answer to a really sweet, short question, but.
Sydney?
Thanks, Marie. No, it didn't answer, but I appreciate that input as well. But I'm also curious about your thoughts on that whole Land Advisory Committee, where it's going, what it's trying to achieve, its goals. Like, do you feel it's going in the right direction? Do you feel what could be improved from it, from your point of view?
Well, what we've seen of it, there are two aspects that we've seen. One of was the what was online all during the summer, and we read that and followed it and counted the people who were saying what, and so on. So we did a lot of study of that during the summer. That was a wonderful exercise. The committee itself looks like a really good, solid committee that has a lot of different representation of different sectors. I think when we go over the names of the people and know their background, which we looked into also, a lot are attached to the current potato industry, which is nothing wrong with that, but there are a lot of them in that category. However, I feel that the committee itself from what we saw, is honoring its commitment to actually hear what people are saying, and I personally like what they've done so far, and it's what they do with the, when they start bringing together what people said and making sure that everybody is heard, not just the high interest groups, but we want them to really hear what the people are saying. But I think they're capable of that, and so I like the process so far and the intent.
Like, I found them to be very receptive, very curious about our ideas as a group. I think it was evident that although everybody was from different corners of the island and different, backgrounds, we all had the same interest, and they seemed to be solution-based, like they were looking for answers or ideas on, okay, if that's not working, what might work, So we had some good discussion around that.
Sydney?
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that. That's good to hear, because it's I don't know. I don't want to say it's under the radar, but I feel because of the climate we're in, their work is kind of going unnoticed. But I'm curious. Like I've been trying to follow along with the feedback that they're posting to the website and all that kind of stuff, and some of it seems good, some of it seems a little bit one-offish, scattered. But I appreciate. I know how intimately involved you all have been in the process, so I appreciate that feedback as well. One thing that when I get talking to people and I've been guilty of singling out, say, Irving's, or I've been guilty of I say guilty, but like also calling them to task on things too. One thing that I've learned along the process as well is that, and I forget the exact number, but I'm going to say 86, but there's like 86 different firms that are at land limits right now in PEI, and that surprised me, to be honest. Now that's not a huge number, but it certainly was more than like the handful that I was thinking of it. So when I've had some of those farmers come to me as well, that's a different side of things that I wasn't sure of, and it made me think of your point, Marie, about or the point that you had made talking about private landowners and building on large acreage, and what does that do? Does it take it out of production? Does it not? So I think it's not just 2 or 3 large corporations. It's obviously it's 80 some different groups that are at those limits, but what it affects everybody. What as individuals are we going to have to do our own part as well? It's not just farmers as well. But I just wanted to make that comment. It was something that I had learned along the way as well.
I also would say that I found the advisory committee, it was effective. I thought it was a positive experience, and I hope that it goes that way further. I would also echo that comment that, except for politicos, it's really not out there. Like, there's so many distractions out there, and I feel like, it's funny because in the countryside, you hear everyone, land is everywhere, and land, we all are concerned, but there's that, I don't know, there's just this disconnect. People aren't, so busy with their daily lives that there's just, I hope to see more people concerned, or also, have the chance to speak those views and stuff like that. I'd also like to just comment on the fact that is surprising that there's that many to the limit. I didn't know that until now. But I always think about that question is like, if we, as a fellow farmer, if we can't make a living off 1,000 or 3,000, that's the problem, and we need to address that problem, And I think the land limit was a radical act to say that enough is enough for one person to own or to make a living off of. I think that, we have to address this whole economic factor, because there is that pressure, I know, from certain farmers that what do they do if, like, they're not making a living off 1,000 or 3,000, and then what's 4,000, 20,000? What's going to make the difference? There's not. There's a clear ceiling, And any improvements, there's just the margin is razor thin. So I think there are other options. I think there are other modern forms of agriculture, as you know, Sydney, like, and you know, everyone here. But like, I think there are other ways, and we should be promoting other forms of agriculture that, you know, lift the farmer up but not exploit it. You know, anyways.
Sydney?
Just one final comment. I appreciate that, Byron, a lot. You know, and it goes back to what both you and Marie said about, you know, it's not necessarily just the you know, decision over is it 3,000 acres, is it 4,000, is it 10,000. It's more about, you know, what does it look like in 20 years, 30 years, kind of thing. Thank you. Thanks.
Did you? Oh, sorry. I thought you had a comment.
Me?
I thought you might have had a comment.
No.
No. Rob?
Thanks for your presentation. You mentioned a few things that I'm going to ask a little more questions on. Regarding the Lands Protection Act, you're probably aware that I made a private member's bill to provide some prioritization of the Lands Protection Act. What was your views on that?
Do you mind repeating that question, Rob? I'm sorry.
In the recent sitting of the legislature, I made a private member's bill amendment to the Lands Protection Act to strengthen the act, to give it the potential of superseding other acts, i.e. you had mentioned the Business Corporations Act and things of that nature. What was your organization's opinion and view on that amendment that I proposed?
Well, our question is, like, what is the meaning of, you know, of strengthening? And I think that I'm thinking of Horace Carver having met with the Assembly last year, and him saying really strongly that sometimes people are saying, well, there isn't enough power to enforce the, you know, the requirements of the Lands Protection Act. It needs to be stronger, and I remember Horace Carver challenging you on that, saying, if there's anything lacking in the Act that makes it difficult for you to enforce it, the legislature is where the power is, and the legislature has to give the government the power that it needs to proceed. And like that, to me, that's really important. And as we presented our recommendations today, like those recommendations are made also to the Assembly, the Legislative Assembly. And the Legislative Assembly, if you discover that there isn't sufficient strength in the Act, identify where the weaknesses are and put those strengths there and empower the government to enforce that. So that was, I really was impressed by Horace's presentation, and I like the intent of your Act as well, that to strengthen, but as long as we're just not, you know, fiddling with words and phrases, as long as we're meaning to give the power to the government has power that comes from the Legislative Assembly. And that's one of the things that we have to keep reminding ourselves, the importance of the Legislative Assembly to give power to the government to enforce acts. And the government's only power has nothing to do with the number of votes you got or anything like that. The government's power comes from legislation. And if the legislation is strong and the government has the power to enforce it, then that's what we need to have. That's where we need to see the strength. Right. I don't know. Did that answer your question?
That's precisely why I made the amendment, and it was to give it that priority. Did you actually read my
yes.
private member's bill? So, as your organization, so you support that?
We would support the intent, for sure.
Rob?
Well, in legislation, we don't have the ability to necessarily do with intent. It's either black or white in the legislation. I mean, there's an intent to put something down on paper, but we have to put the options there so that the the judicial system can interpret, what our intentions are. By providing it that particular piece of legislation as a priority over others, like the Business Corporations Act and things of that nature, to me that follows exactly what Horace Carver was trying to give. So you're being a bit fuzzy here as far as whether you support that amendment or not, because the legislature did not support.
Look, I think I followed that online when you were doing that. And I just don't have the the words of how you presented that. So, but I think that's why I say the intent. I think.
Rob,
it was pretty simple. It was about three sentences, I believe. But anyway, in regards to that, it did not get the support of this legislature. So, now there is always possibilities. It sounds like there's going to be a new sitting of the legislature coming up, and it'll be a new speech from the throne. So there is possibilities of bringing that forward again and seeing where it goes. But
don't give up.
Oh, thanks. My other question, you mentioned about land banking. And, I would say as a former Minister of Agriculture, as a former farmer in this province, the concept of land banking sounded that it had some real potential. In your opening statement, you made the comment about we are on the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Have you consulted with the Mi'kmaq people on their view around land banking for agriculture?
Did we consult with them? Well, we didn't do the land banking study, but I know that there was a very deep consultation with the Mi'kmaq people about the question of land banking. Yes.
Rob?
And you believe they're in support of that?
We haven't seen any indication that they're not in support of it.
Rob?
Well, the problem is that the government has an arrangement with the Mi'kmaq organizations, I guess, and it's called a duty to consult. So on any land transaction that occurs of land that's owned by the province, there's a duty to consult and get the approval of the Indigenous groups to allow that transaction to occur. Usually, there's some sort of formulation of compensation that goes with those types of transactions. So the issue that I had when I was a Minister of Agriculture was that it winds up that if government acquires a property and you lease it or rent it out to farmers to farm, whatever those situations would be, the farmers at some point in time in the future, when they decide that they would like to acquire that land and own that land, they have to go through this duty to consult process, which usually means that government winds up having to purchase the land on 2 occasions, or somebody has to override that consultation process. So that becomes a little bit problematic. Plus, I think there's the history in PEI where, when the Crown or government owns the land and you have then tenant farmers is not necessarily where I think that farmers want to go. Farmers want to own their land. They want to have the sweat equity into that land that they've accrued and to continue on, hopefully in the best interest of that particular property. People that own the land are hopefully doing what's in the best interest of that particular parcel of land. And so that's why I sort of have a concern that when you're just a tenant farmer, you may not put the inputs into the land because you may not know that how long you're going to own that land or have the right to farm that land. So you're at the whim of the Crown maybe in that particular case. So those are the things of concerns that I have around a land bank. So that's why I would say I think that really has to be a real thorough discussion on, if Indigenous groups are going to give up their potential of rights to that land, as you said, unceded territory. So that's a big discussion, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. So I know Byron had some comments he'd like to add to.
We'll address that, then we wouldn't need you. We could address just them in terms of land. I mean, I don't want to get deep into that discussion, but what I would say is, if back to the tenant farmer and as land banking, I can tell you right now, yes, it's a situation where farmers would love to own land that they put their sweat equity in, and I'm very blessed and privileged that I can do I own the land that I farm on, but I can tell you the reality of any new farmer, young farmer, they're almost always in a lease situation. It's if they're even lucky to acquire land. So I can tell you the land that I sit on, the price I paid, I couldn't afford it now. And that's been 10 years. So just to get the foot in the door would be an amazing opportunity. So I feel that no situation is perfect, but I know lots of bigger farms that are also leasing, and it's a precarious situation. I've seen lots of farmers around us lose land that they were planning on cropping the next year. Over the winter time, they lose it. Somebody else outbid them. So we're always in a precarious situation, as I'm sure you understand. And but I think land banking is something we should look into seriously. We've done a report, Kevin Arsenault has done a report. It's, I don't know where it is right now, but I'd like to take a closer look at it. We've done it in the past, there's been mistakes, but there's also been quite, I think, beneficial things that come out of it. But I'm new to PEI, so I'm not a historian, I don't know it all. But I just want to stress that, though, I wouldn't be too quick to dismiss the land banking issue, and yeah, and I wouldn't want to dismiss the Indigenous issue either, to be quite honest. Yeah, anyways, that's all I got to say. And I would really appreciate, though, that if there was anything to do with land, that we do consult the Indigenous, population here. And yeah, anyways, that's it. Yeah.
Rob?
Yeah, well, therein lies the challenge that governments have. I mean, all governments, you have to make those decisions, and I agree, they're not easy. And I'm not saying I dismiss land banking either, but I'm just saying that that's one of the downfalls of it, is that it's hard to get that transaction of that particular land back over into the particular individual's farm and its name without undue compensation that goes to somewhere, somebody, some organization. So that's what my final section I want to talk a little bit more about is I've been advocating somewhat for a provincial livestock strategy in the province, and I know we're talking a little bit about land, and you talked about some of the soil degradation, soil health issues, you talked about some definitions of sustainability. Do you feel that there's a need for a livestock strategy to encourage the livestock production in the province so that it can have more manures that can be incorporated into the soils? And I'll have a second part to that question, but just to see what your thoughts are on a livestock strategy.
I'll speak to that. Yeah. Yes. I mean, I think we do need to see more livestock operations on the farm, on PEI. Yeah, it's a sad state when there's only a couple hog producers, and but again, all these boil down to we need to be able to, get more out of the price that we're selling, our food for. It's not an issue. It's basic economics, and there's way too many middlemen. Anyway, so I won't go into but that's, yeah, anything that would encourage a better environment, but a better, yeah, to encourage livestock operations and so on.
Okay, my final add-on to this, I guess, would be a little bit more. I had a call from an individual just the other day because of, the talk about soil health and things of that nature, and he brought up a point that kind of made a bit of sense to me, and I'm just sort of wondering what a group like your organization would do in regards to this. And it came at, one time in Prince Edward Island, there was significant amounts of dredging, like for mussel mud and things of that nature, to incorporate that into the soils, which provided a sort of a supplement to lime and things of that nature. What's your thoughts on allowing that to happen again on Prince Edward Island? Because number one, it would take some of that soil that did run off and put it back onto the land. It would also improve soil health significantly, and probably improve agricultural production in general terms. So the concept of mussel mud dredging on Prince Edward Island, is that something that you as an organization would support or subscribe to?
Well, we would certainly support anything that is going to increase the organic matter of the soil. Whatever is appropriate for that. Am I getting an echo there again?
No, you're fine.
Okay. No, whatever is appropriate to do that. Like I know the whole story of mussel mud because I was brought up on a mussel mud farm, and so anything that increases the organic matter of the soil, and that's going to be different in different generations. But a lot of the soil that's been eroding in the past few years, I don't think we need it back because it's soil that's already dead. So what we're seeing in the ditches of Prince County and Kings County are like it's soil that we don't need to put back, but we need to find where the high organic matter is in all of our environment and use that to recreate organic matter in the soil. That would be our position on that.
I understand. I appreciate that, but I just want to end with, I think organic matter is definitely important. I don't think it's the only thing that's important regarding soil health. I think there's a combination of issues there, so I just want to kind of make that statement. So, and I'll pass it on to others. Thanks.
If I could just add to that, though, without the soil health, you've got nothing. So it really is, the key to improving the land here in PEI. And the way I see it, and the way many of my colleagues here see it, is that the key is to change the model. So reduce the pesticides, reduce the nitrates. I read a comment there this morning that really hit me. That one of the farmers in Summerside was watching one of the Cavendish Farms boats come in full of nitrates. And he thought, isn't it ironic, that they're buying the pesticides from Cavendish Farms to kill all the organic matter in the soil, and then they're buying the nitrates to put those synthetic chemicals back in the soil so they can grow potatoes. It's a vicious cycle, and we need to get off of it.
Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for taking the time to come in today, all of you. I really appreciate your comments. You've obviously done lots of consultation and spoken with a lot of different groups, and I think the points that you make are relevant and important. There's just a few things that I wanted to go back to, jumping off of something that my colleague Robbie said was around land banking and our duty to consult. And I would really encourage government particularly to not be thinking of it as undue compensation. I think that we do have a duty to consult with our Indigenous people, and if we are indeed serious about reconciliation, I think it's incredibly important that we don't use our duty to consult as an excuse to not act on an issue that's important. I think land banking is an incredibly valuable tool. I've read the Horace Carver report years before I got involved in politics, and I think we have been hearing for a long time that farmers are having a difficult time to access land to farm on. I definitely know lots of young farmers who have just gotten into it who are in a situation similar to what you've described, Byron, where they are leasing small amounts of land and then find out the next year they're not going to be able to do so. Getting your foot in the door with farming is incredibly important, and I think that land banking can be a way in which you can solve an issue that you brought up, Marie, I believe, about how when a farmer wants to retire, they are selling their land, someone buys it and puts a house in the middle of 40 acres or 100 acres. It doesn't keep farmland protected as farmland. So in order for a farmer to be able to retire, someone has to be able to buy that land. It's assuming a lot to think that a new farmer who's getting into farming, has the financial means to purchase the amount of land that a farmer might be selling. So I think there are a number of ways to do this, and I'm not surprised, frankly, that you haven't had consultation with the Indigenous community about land banking, because as I understand it, you aren't coming here to propose that you start a land bank, but that you think it's an action government needs to take. So I would think it was, unless you're planning to start a nonprofit to do that, I'm not surprised that you haven't done consultation, but my colleague asks you to support a piece of legislation that you don't have in front of you, and I note he hasn't consulted you on that either. So was there any discussion ahead of time with my colleague when he's wanting you to support a bill he brought forward that you don't have in front of you? Were you consulted on his bill to see if there were ways to improve it or if it met the intent that he was trying to bring forward? A question for any of you.
Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. So I'm not surprised, again, that you didn't consult with the Indigenous community on something that you were not personally undertaking. I am surprised that my colleague is asking you to support a piece of legislation he hasn't consulted you about when you don't have it in front of you. But I will say that I think the intent of what Robbie wants to do is really positive. And I agree we need changes on the Lands Protection Act, but I personally did not see that the piece of legislation he brought forward would do exactly that. But I suppose that's a topic I will let somebody else dig into. So I think that the Lands Protection Act is definitely needing review. I think it's good that we do have this committee digging into it, and I'm glad your experience with that was positive. The real question, of course, will be what comes on the other side of it. I think we've seen lots of good presentations so far. We've seen Horace Carver's report. We've seen lots of recommendations on what needs to be happening with land. Whether or not what we needed was more consultation, I won't say. It is my view that we already knew what needed to be done. I don't anticipate that there are going to be significant new changes coming forward as a result of this. I think sometimes consultation can be a means of delay on just acting to get the job done. And personally, I think I will judge this Land Matters Committee based on what government does with it at the end. And that's more of a comment than it is a question. I have been reading the book A Time and a Place, An Environmental History of PEI. So while I'm not certainly able to say I was born in 1969, Marie, I have now read through quite a lot of the history on how we got to where we are on PEI. And it is really interesting seeing the staggering numbers of farms reducing as the acreages got bigger and farmers were leaving the land is really distressing. And I think that Robbie is spot on that we need a livestock strategy on PEI. One of the overarching themes when I'm reading this book is how critical animals on the land were to the success of farms moving forward. There's a huge correlation there, so I 100% agree with you on that. I'm wondering if in any of the presentations that you've heard so far, are you hearing much about what farmers would need to support more livestock on their land? And I guess that question might be to you, particularly Byron, as a farmer, as I understand it.
What farmers would need?
What is the biggest barrier to having livestock?
I mean, we could spend all afternoon if we wanted to. I mean, money. Let's put it that way. I mean, just the fact that right now I'm a vegetable farmer. I used to do I'm not a big farm, so I can't speak in commodities, but the one thing that's sticking out to my mind is the rail tax or whatever that was just back in the early 2000s. Paul Martin cut it off. Something about there was a subsidy for, sending pork and other, there was a beef too, I think, that was to the main, to Quebec and Ontario. And anyways, it allowed us to be competitive in Ontario and Quebec, I guess, and price-wise. But yeah, I mean, the whole commodity thing is just, you're not going to win in this game. I mean, I think PEI is really funny because it's like the small farm that I am playing in a big city. Like, I think, if we want to play with Idaho with potatoes, you're not going to win. And it's just you can't produce that many potatoes. We see that Manitoba has surpassed us now, or I think it's Manitoba in production, or Alberta. I mean, we need to specialize. We need to be that niche market, that small farm mentality. And I'm not saying that the commodity thing is great on the mainland either, but I'm just saying so for livestock, we just need to promote our local economies way more. Like I shouldn't see Alberta beef being sold here in PEI. It's ridiculous. It's like cattle's passing each other on the highway, selling to opposite ends. It just doesn't make any sense. We need to promote like local economies wherever we can. If I could do my 2 cents about that, because all the money I've made is here on PEI, and I've spent it all at the local water. No, I'm just kidding. Here, I spent it all here in PEI. You know, so I don't know. Anyways, that's sort of a roundabout question. They just need encouragement. I mean, the beef plant here, that's great. I wish I'd love to see them, you know, specialize in doing a bit more, but we also need our abattoirs. Like, where's the federal abattoir in the Maritimes? Is there one? There's one. Well, the beef plant, sorry. But for pork, none, right? It's like, what about poultry? None. We don't have the means to kill one in Nova Scotia. So it's just we need, you know, I'll say even in Kings County, there was no, when Shaw's, I forget when Shaw's went out, like an LNS wasn't up yet again, I had to hold on to my sheep for another 6 months so they weren't lamb anymore, you know, which didn't matter to me. I was going to eat them anyways, but it was not. But, you know, like if I had been someone who was counting on it, there's no support for those guys either. So, yeah, they're missing a whole bunch of like infrastructure, critical livestock infrastructure. Yeah.
Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. I completely agree with you. Infrastructure is the word that I had written down. I think that a great amount of those systems have been allowed to erode on PEI, and it just makes it easier to rely on imported fertilizers. It makes it easier to rely on imported everything because the systems to those things locally don't appear to be in place anymore. I could talk for a while, but I will let someone else ask some questions, but I thank you for your presentation so far.
Michelle?
Great. Thank you, Chair. Joan, Marie, and Byron, thank you for being here, and thanks for your presentation. And thank you for taking the time to make such a comprehensive, cohesive presentation with well-defined calls to action. And I can think of a number of reports and commissions in the past that have also done the same thing. So I would agree with what Lynn said. You know, you judge it based on actions that are taken, and when you're being told report after report of what needs to happen, and we're not inching forward to get that achieved, I think it comes back to like a strategic plan, and you start chipping away at it. This is not something that's going to be resolved tomorrow. It's a long-term plan that needs to be put in place, and how we're going to get it resolved. And I will just follow up on the legislation for the Lands Protection Act that came forward, and it was admirable. I mean, I was present when Horace Carver sat here in this legislature and said, if the minister doesn't have the powers that he needs, then give him the power. I find it, though, concerning when a former Minister of Agriculture would put in an overarching piece of legislation, not knowing what the problem is when you've been the minister of that department. And that there is no consultation, obviously, that's happened with stakeholders. So when you bring something forward for the Lands Protection Act and you don't speak to the PEI Coalition for the Protection of Land, I would wonder what we're accomplishing. And I'm concerned by that. And I think if we look back at, in 2019, when I brought forward in July 2014 the Bedeck land sale, and at that point in time it was a rumor that, was not acted on, and now we look, we're a year and a half, and we're still in what I would call an absolute mess. And so to me, it comes down to, I mean, I'm a project manager. That's my background, my past job, and really laying out what needs to happen. And if you don't know what is holding you up, how can you make the rules in order to remove those barriers? And what I was really hoping that would come out of that report is just showing us how did that transaction happen, so that we can check off some of those recommendations that you have in your list. And I think that that's really what it comes down to. We have a very clear example of something that's happened. We've got, evidence and proof. And so how do we change the legislation? And I think that that's what it comes down to. I don't think it necessarily comes down to who it is or who sold the land or who bought the land. It's if it is in contravention of the Lands Protection Act, it doesn't matter if it was me that did it or if it was you that did it. I think at the end of the day, we need to know why it happened, how it happened, and seal that up, because that wasn't the intent of the Lands Protection Act. So I would ask a question. So you've been involved in these consultations over the last, Thompson report was in 2009, the Harvest Carpenter report was in, 2013, was it? I lost the date. And the Task Force on Land Use Policy was 2014. Now that we're into another review process, how would you feel, though, if no actions were taken that came out of this current review? What's your feeling on what happens there?
I just want to I'll make a personal comment first. I made my first presentation to a government committee in 1970. Do you know how long ago that is?
I wasn't born yet.
And it was about the Lands Protection Act. That was in 1970, the year after the passing of the legislature. It was a very interesting moment because the group I was with, there was a priest in the group who was also a musician, and he wrote a song. And the song was, "Don't Sell PEI." And anyway, we didn't know he was going to do that. We did our presentation, and all of a sudden he grabs the guitar and he gets up and he sings this song. No, don't sell PEI. And I thought the committee, it was a standing committee of the legislature, I thought the chair was going to faint. Number one, that he didn't expect to have a song at the end of a presentation, and what's this guy? He came in with this collar on, of course, which he never wore any other time. But anyway, I was just thinking while we're talking here this morning, how many presentations do you have to make to the legislature, to the legislative committees, to the committees studying the land? How many do we have to make before people get the idea? Like legislators, I'm talking to you. How long does it take before you get the message that there's something friggin' wrong with the system we're in? It's not just a little, like, could we do this and could we do that? The system has been designed to destroy a form of agriculture that could have kept the land in good health. And so one of the things that we said when we were talking to Land Matters is, while we're sitting here this moment, we are having land transactions going on around us that are doubtful. That there should be question marks on them. We're here discussing and discussing. And I must say the presentation we made today is very much the same as the presentation we made in 1970. So where are we getting with this? Like I'm speaking, I hope, for a lot of the people in the community. Like, where are we going with this, folks? How long do we have to say it's inappropriate to have industrial agriculture as the predominant agriculture in Prince Edward Island or anywhere, but especially in Prince Edward Island. We don't have very much land. We have very little topsoil. We have very, very poor land, actually. We think we have great land and we have all kinds of it. So my question is, how long do we have to talk about this before people will actually stop talking about the nitty, this little detail and that little detail? The big picture is the question. And I think it's time, if the legislators cannot take this question and go honestly with it, I don't know where it's going. I'm not going to be around to make another presentation in 45 years, but other people will be doing this. And we reminded the committee, the Land Matters Committee, we said, like, do we want to be sitting around like the old emperor who fiddled while Rome burned? Because I think that's what we're doing.
Michelle? Oh, sorry, Joe.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that, I think without the political will, obviously, it's never going to happen, right? So something has to change. Like Marie said, 45 years we've been doing this. Not a lot has changed. It's getting worse and worse, of course. And one thing that Marie and I were talking about earlier today was, I think it was an election campaign promise, but Premier King has mentioned it as recently to our group as November. We did a presentation to him, and he said that there would be some kind of a training for all MLAs so that they understood the Land Protection Act. It's obvious to anyone who watches the legislature in session that some MLAs are very familiar and others haven't got a clue. So, just across the board, if there were some basic understanding, and just to know that everyone had in fact read the Lands Protection Act and was up and familiar with, what had happened to date. I think that's really necessary too, because it's you guys that are voting on these things, that hasn't happened. I don't know what happened to that plan, but, we meant to add that to the recommendations. Add that one. Thank you.
Michelle?
Thank you for that. And something I found really interesting last week, so I attended the PEI Federation of Agriculture's AGM, and the question and answers at the end, a number of farmers had asked about breaking up land. So when a large ownership, when you have thousands of acres, that's extremely difficult to sell in a succession plan. So if you don't have anybody coming up behind you to purchase that land, I had, less than 100 acres sell for almost $1 million near me because of speculation buying. So when it comes down to who do we want to own land, what do we want done with the land, if we are consolidating into big parcels and big ownership of land, it becomes challenging then for the people to sell it as part of their retirement package, because that is a farmer's retirement. And so there was a number of suggestions about how do you break those parcels up so that young farmers and new farmers can purchase maybe a small parcel of that big acreage, and that maybe somebody like Byron, if you wanted to grow an extra 50 acres or 100 acres, you'd have the opportunity. And I think that that's an interesting concept because it's coming from some pretty large farmers who can no longer afford to buy the land, which then brings us back to land banking, right? And how do you build in succession planning for those large farmers who really, at the end of the day, the only option for them to sell their land is somebody who's got X millions of dollars in their pocket, and that's a challenge, especially to keep it in agriculture. So I know that you've read the land banking report, and I don't know where that stands either, but that's certainly something that we can get an update on. But is there any other type of solution or scenarios that you could think of. Like I had two farmers mention cooperatives, where somebody's part of a cooperative. Like, have you guys looked at any other ways to assist in succession planning, or considered that as part of the challenges that farmers and landowners have right now? And if you haven't, that's fine, but.
Yeah, I mean, in various forms, like I think COPC lists on their weekly newsletter of people who are looking to sell land and or meet someone who wants to take over the farm and so on and so forth. Yeah, and NFU has done the same in different places. In PEI, it's kind of more informal. I'll tell you that my situation was one where my neighbor, Reg Phelan, offered me a job. I farmed for him the first year, and even then I couldn't really afford the land, so he was generous enough to sell us some of his land, and he mortgaged it so we could pay him back slowly. And so that was like a very informal way of land transition. But yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be an issue coming up for sure, because I think the average age is like 58 for farmers. I mean, 10 years from now, there's going to be a huge windfall of, you know, farmers looking for a way out. And yeah, that on the flip side, that is a big issue. So I do think we do need to see, I don't know, most older farmers I've spoken to who don't, like, it's, you don't see as much the whole, sadly, you know, the offspring taking over the farm per se. It still happens, but more and more you do see that now farmers who, you know, their kids moved off to the city or something, and most farmers I've spoken to are really open to an idea. They just want to see their you know, their sweat and blood and tears. You know, they want to see their farm go on. So most I've spoken to are like been open to different ideas of how to transition their land over, whether that's working it off or, you know, a longer term type mortgage type thing. But yeah, it's going to be an issue for sure.
Michelle?
And I agree, Byron, and I think that's part of the reason why, like, this has been an issue, obviously, Marie, that you've been speaking to since 1970, but we're seeing that consolidation actually causes issues at another point in time, and whenever we make decisions, I think it's important that we look at what is the future impact of us making that decision. So when we look at land holdings and that kind of thing, there has to be discussion around, but what does that mean at another point in time? And anyway, I appreciate that, like I said, that you took the time to complete such a precise presentation. What I also appreciate is that you defined spirit and intent. So I had a conversation with somebody yesterday about the letter of the law and how that seems to be overrule what the spirit and intent was. So I do hope that once we come through this consultation that we do have some focus on what is the spirit and intent, and some, I mean, I've been doing what I can here in the legislature. I've you know, land for me is a priority, and I think I've demonstrated that through sticking with some of the major issues that we're experiencing. I get concerned by people who sit on these committees that do all this work. You look at, you know, the major land reviews in the past, and, you know, those people who have done all that hard work, and then government has done nothing with their work, and it sits on a shelf. And I think that that's a disrespectful thing to do with islanders that have taken their time to really try to make a difference. And I think that it's time now that this has to happen. So I appreciate you coming in and sharing your presentation with us as well. Thank you.
Steve?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for coming in today, guys. A lot of what you said resonates with how I feel about this issue. And I mean, we can all agree land is a very limited resource in Prince Edward Island. We're the most populous or densely populated province. And in the race to be bigger or biggest, PEI is going to lose that battle. So when we're trying to compete with industrial agriculture that has vast tracts of land, the only way for us to
Sorry, could you speak up a bit? I'm just missing a lot of what you're saying. Sure. Sorry.
So you want me to just start again?
No, I'm done with it. Thanks.
Okay. Okay, so in the race to be bigger, PEI is going to lose that when we're competing with places that have vast tracts of land available for industrial agriculture. Unless, of course, we're willing to pour more and more inputs onto our own soil, which creates all sorts of other issues because our land's tied to our water. So there's a very large issue created there. And PEI has other strengths that we can draw on beyond size that we need to focus on. I appreciate Byron's comments that there's other ways we can compete and make farms. There's an underlying issue if farms have to continue to grow in order to remain prosperous, that just can't go on forever on PEI. So we must find a new way to make those farms prosperous. So focus on local prosperity for those farms is absolutely something we need to do here. Joan, you had mentioned that we have nothing without healthy soil, but we do have something. We have that dependency on industrial inputs. So it would leave us completely at the mercy of forces off of non-Prince Edward Island forces. So if we wanted to have farming continue, it would be at the behest of corporations, industrial corporations. And the word sustainable. I love the word sustainable, but to me it always means finding the right balance. And on PEI, it should be fairly easy for us to figure out there's this much land, and here's what we can do with it. I'd be very in support of a livestock strategy to go into place to find out what balance we need for livestock to end up with the amount of healthy soil, to end up with the amount of farming that we have. We do it with almost every other industry. I'm pretty sure we can find a way to make it work with our land as well. So I just wanted to add those comments, not really a question for you. Thank you.
Ola?
Thank you, and thank you very much for your presentation and your recommendations. I would say I completely agree with almost every one of them, even though I'm not much of a farmer or have much experience there. I also completely agree with your frustration that the discussion has been going on for near half a century without much action, and I can tell as a new legislator that clearly the Minister of Agriculture is hiding behind this new commission, often refusing to do anything, because now you can say, well, I have to wait for the commission to come up with their results, which will likely be very much the same results that we already have on the table. I was listening to you talk about the intent of the limits, that it was kind of meant to be a family, whether it was a corporation or a single owner. And I was wondering if you think there's room for stricter regulations there, that maybe whoever owns the farm should live on it and farm it. As an example, in Denmark, you can buy land. They don't have the restrictions we have here, but if you buy farmland, you have a duty to farm it. But do you have any comments on that? On making the owner, the actual owners of the farms, actual farmers?
That is really our intent when we talk about the zoning of land, that in PEI we have not had a true zoning of land in which we identified farmland that is to be kept as farmland, and that's what we are promoting, and that there are other uses of land, and those uses should not be lived out on farmland. Like there's no room for an industrial operation being out on the farmland. So that's something that I think would be quite strong about. that we need to have really strong designation of the land in PEI, and like some of the land that is now in farming really should be designated as non-farm land. It should, like, there should not be any farming done on that land until there can be some reconstruction. We had talked this morning about the fact that we talk about people who have addictions, and how in order to get rid of addictions there has to be detoxification. We have a lot of farmland that really first and foremost has to be detoxified. And it's a process. It's something like the human body. The land is going to have to be, we have to look at the land as alive as the human body, and that is that if we want the land in PEI to be productive, to become productive, because I don't think that a lot of our land is very productive right now, if you have to have boatloads of nitrate coming in Summerside. So, yeah. We have to have, like, there needs to be some planning, some imagination first of all. Like, how do you actually do that, and to have a really sincere way of zoning land so that farmland is not used for any other purpose, and that farmland that is now destroyed farmland be reconstructed, be detoxified and built up.
Ola?
Thank you. I completely agree as a former architect that land planning is absolutely needed on PEI, and the government has stepped around that possibility or obligation for as long as I've been here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Finished.
Yeah. Any further questions? No. Okay. Well, thank you, Marie, Joan, Byron. Thank you for your time today, and we'll certainly, the committee will take under consideration your recommendations and when we next report to the Legislative Assembly. So we're just going to recess for a moment while you take off, and then we'll continue. All right, let's keep rolling. Next up is discussion of scheduling. As of now, our next meeting will be on February 18th to hear from IRAC on the process of land sale investigations. So they're coming, which is good. Number 6, review of correspondence. We have the letter from the minister, Minister Thompson. Have you all had a chance to take a look at that and read it? Yeah. Is there any discussion on it? Steve?
Who's referred, sorry, Chair, who's the certain persons referred to here? I'm not aware, as the letter indicates in the 4th paragraph.
Can you read that out?
Further, as you may be aware, since receiving your invitation, certain persons involved in the transactions have filed judicial review applications against myself, Minister of Agriculture and Land. I'm not aware of that.
I don't know. I'm assuming it would be in the courts. I have no idea.
Okay. I guess it's just
Steve?
part of the letter is that it's assuming that we're aware of that, so maybe we can ask some details on that paragraph or that sentence there and find out.
I'll Google it here.
Very good.
Just wanna wait a minute.
Sorry, I guess I'm not quite clear what you're...
I was just wondering what this was referring to exactly, since I'm not aware of exactly what it's saying it believes I'm aware of.
I'm not sure how Google's coming here, but...
We can wait. Carry on. And
I'm trying to find it. I don't know if it's relevant
Lynn?
to the discussion on it, but.
Lynn? You're not... Oh, no, sorry. No.
I'm good, Chair.
Okay. I guess as we know, the Health and Social Development Committee also passed a motion to have the minister... I think no, was it the minister appear?
Yeah, so the
With the-
motion was to bring the minister and anyone else who would add value to the discussion as Justice and Public Safety, and to bring an unredacted copy of the report for an in-camera meeting. And while that is in the hands of Health and Social Development, any interested member could appear, but they would be subject to the same rules for the in-camera meeting. Yes.
I think a 2-week deadline, so...
Yeah.
Yeah. Sydney?
Thank you, Chair. There's two court applications for judicial review, one from Rebecca Irving and the other from Red Fox Acres. To save another letter back to the minister.
Thank you, Sydney. Is there any further discussion on that correspondence? No? Any new business? No? All right, motion to adjourn? Thank you.